Hi and welcome back to Joe Talks Cars and welcome to another video. In today's video it was a little bit of a Q&A type video to cover a few of the questions that I find regularly in the comments and also an email from a subscriber asking about this particular car and how I felt about the engine rebuild process and everything else about owning this car when I found out it had bore scoring. So one of the first questions they asked about the bore scoring was there any signs beforehand? Well, I have covered this in a few of my videos, but obviously I can talk about it again. So after buying the car 3 months into ownership, there was nothing apparently wrong with the car. Drove quite nicely, didn't really burn much oil. It seemed perfect. I had a little bit of blue smoke on startup, which when I read online, it's perfectly normal. After roughly 2 months, I noticed that the puff of blue smoke on a morning was getting bigger, sometimes filling the entire street with blue smoke. The exhaust tips were getting very, very dark and almost like wet, like they looked like oil was coming out. Obviously it was more of the carbon because the fuel wasn't being burnt right, so it was more carbon, and then water vapour made it look almost oily, but that was kind of weird. That sort of raised alarm bells for me. And then ultimately, after about 3 months, it was the oil usage. For me, the oil usage was so excessive, I thought that the sensor had failed. So that would be the first sign, I would say. With bore scoring on a Cayman or a 911, it's all about your oil usage. So this car went from using around 1 litre of oil every 1,000 miles, which, if you look in your book, is within tolerance, to around 2.5 litres per 150 miles or thereabouts. It was so excessive, like I said, I thought the sensor had failed. So sometimes when you park the car on a slant, like it is today, the oil level would register as empty. So I assumed, well, it's because I parked on a slant. My driveway is on an angle like that, so I couldn't check it on a morning. I only could check it after I finished work. And even then I was thinking, well, maybe the car park slanted. I was putting it down to anything else other than bore scoring. What I should have been doing in that time, instead of prattling around, filling it up with oil, recording mileage on bits of paper, and trying to get the car perfectly level and warm, was simply take it to a garage and get a diagnostic on this. So I took it in and they discovered it had bore scoring on all 3 cylinders down one side. Very, very severe bore scoring. So much so that when we took the engine apart, bits of the piston had already started to come away, so it was very, very significant. After the car was rebuilt, this is another question that's been asked in the comments and also from this latest email, was what was the running in process like after I had the engine rebuild? Well, I'm probably going to get shouted at once again in the comments because I had this rebuilt at Strasza at Leeds. I don't know anything about engines, I don't know anything about rebuilding engines, and I asked them what is the process for running this car in? They did around 500 miles, I think, roughly, in the time they had it. Running it in, checking everything was okay, checking for leaks, it was fine. I then drove probably another 1,000 miles or so, and I think now I'm up to about 3,000 miles on this new engine, and the answer to have I run it in or done anything is no, I've not done anything, I've not even serviced it. People are probably going to go mental and say, well, you should have changed the oil after 1,000 miles. I thought that's what I needed to do as well. I checked with the garage, they said there's no need, modern engines, you don't need to. So I didn't bother. I just drove it. I've driven it for 3,000 miles. It's not put a foot wrong. So the next thing I want to talk about is my experience with the car, with the whole process of rebuilding it. And would I have done anything different if I knew what I know now? Would I have got rid of the car, kept it? What am I feeling? Well, the whole process of having this engine rebuilt at Strasza was fairly painless apart from the bill. Taking it in, they scoped the car, agreed a date, and I came back and got it rebuilt. They reckoned it would take between 4 and 6 weeks. It was slightly longer than 6 weeks, but even still, it's not really bad when you consider the amount of work that goes into that. So I got the car back, and apart from the huge bill, it's not been a headache at all. I've had no further issues with the car, and it runs really, really smoothly. Before this, the car did actually run really, really nicely, although I did feel like it was slightly down on power. Sometimes I would come up on a dual carriageway and there'd be something like a Corsa VXR, for example. I would race past it and sometimes struggle to even get ahead. And I thought, well, maybe they've tuned it up or something weird, but either way, it did struggle. Since getting it back, and once I'd got a few miles under its belt and everything seemed to be okay and I started to push it a bit harder, you realise how much power it's actually unlocked. the car not only sounds better, it pulls harder, and crucially, uses absolutely no oil. And now the question that everyone keeps asking is, in hindsight, would I have done anything differently with this car? What do I wish I did when buying this car? It all comes down to one thing, and that's a pre-purchase inspection. It may seem really, really obvious, but you have to remember with these cars, most people buy them with their hearts, not their heads. And I did exactly that. And it's what prompted me to start my YouTube channel. You see, when I bought this car, I just went into the garage, saw its seal grey paint, its navy blue interior, and the flat 6 engine, and thought, I have to own that car. And I didn't think about bore scoring, I didn't think about the cost of the tyres or the brakes or anything. I just wanted the car. And because I feel that most people, although they won't regularly admit it, buy Porsches on that basis, this channel is so relevant because so many people are in the same position as me. So if I'd done anything differently, it would have been quite simple, a pre-purchase inspection, and had someone scope the bores to make sure they were actually sound. I'm not even going to suggest that the garage knew that this car had bore scoring, but if it did, we would have found out and I could have avoided the car. So other than the pre-purchase inspection, I wouldn't have done anything differently. I wouldn't have had the car made into a bigger engine. I wouldn't have done anything differently. I think what I did to this car was the right thing, and that was to restore the 3.4 litre engine as it came out of the factory, although slightly better this time. A lot of people have asked the question why I didn't go to Hartech, and the answer is simple. It all comes down to cash flow. The garage I took it to cost roughly £3,000 to £4,000 less than what Hartech charged. This is not to say that Hartech isn't the best in the business. They probably are, but £4,000 is a lot of money, and it's something that I wasn't willing to push to. £10,000 repair bill on a 14 grand car is quite a tough pill to swallow, so I never intended to take it to Hartech. The Strasa, the garage nearest me, are very, very well known in the business, and they're also quite local. I can't fault their work, everything's been perfect, and I don't regret any of it. The only thing I would say in hindsight is, as much as I love this car, I think if I knew I was heading towards the likelihood of a £10,000 bill on this, I probably would have got PCP on a newer 981 or even gone for a 911 just to avoid the worry of this engine. I often talk about how I want a 911, and I certainly won't be buying a 911 that has this problem with the engine. I'll be buying a newer one that eradicates the issue of bore scoring. The whole process, although it has been fairly straightforward and fairly stress-free, it's still been painful to pay for that huge bill. And I feel that the only people should be held responsible for such a problem with the engine is Porsche themselves. They should have realised the problem, they should have rectified it. This problem is way, way more widespread than what Porsche would have you believe, and I would recommend anyone buying one of these not to necessarily be put off, but make sure you do your research and buy it after it's had a bore scope to prove the engine's fine. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this very impromptu video. I just thought I would cover off a few questions that I've had, not only in my emails, but also in the comments. They may help a few of you understand my rationale for rebuilding this, my thoughts about why I rebuilt it and the journey of rebuilding this car and how I feel. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.